All right, welcome everyone. We are covering today's subject, multiculturalism and inclusion, and our keynote speaker, once his mic gets going, will be Jehad Aliweiwi. Um, and I'm just going to give you a brief background on the agenda. Essentially, we're going to cover the brief background on the two organizations, NCAR and the Canaan Arab Institute. Uh, I think Reja is going to speak a little bit about your voice campaign. Just give you a few rules on how to use the Fuse interaction, how to flag a question, how to send your message, and then we'll introduce Jihad. I think we're going to go for about 30 minutes and then open it up for question and answer at the end. So very briefly, and there's a lot of information on our website, National Council of Canada-Arab Relations has been around for about 30 years, and the uh, the main objective is educational in background, and it comprises of Canadians of diverse backgrounds. It's not an Arab organization necessarily, but it has very diverse members from coast to coast. And the objective is to build knowledge and ties between Canadians and the people of the Arab world in order to develop stronger relations and cooperation. Um, the goal again is to advance education by providing seminars, conferences, workshops, webinars like this, providing leadership training, um, and again with a focus on social, economic, political, and cultural history as it concerns the Arab world and the Middle East. Um, Our website, which I would encourage you to visit, has a lot of useful sources, insights, ideas, papers, and some webinars as well that you can access. And if you have any questions, by all means, send us an email or send me a message. And I'm going to hand it over to Raja to just very briefly outline the Your Voice campaign and the Canaan Arab Institute.
Well, I'll start with the Canadian Arab Institute, which is a very complementary organization to the National Council, the NCAR, in the sense that, in the same way that NCAR is focused on Canada's relations with the Arab world, the Canadian Arab Institute is focused on the relations between the Canadian Arab community and other Canadians, and it really is about inclusion. It's about inclusion of the community in all the different spheres: cultural, political, civic, socioeconomic, and so on. It's a fairly new organization. It started as an idea in 2011. And the idea was that to create not to create, but very much to give the Canadian Arab community a profile that is realistic, educate other Canadians about us, about us as a community, about our culture, about the region we come from. Most of what people relate to as when it comes to Arabs is really the headlines, and as we all know, the headlines are really never flattering. It's a region in conflict. It's a region that has been in conflict for a long time, and these days in particular more than ever. So we like to produce information, education that helps Canadians deepen their understanding of us as a community, as well as our culture and heritage. Our vision statement really says it all. It's about an empowered and engaged community in an inclusive and respectful society. So we deal with the community and we deal with the larger society. And what we do with the larger society is we do policy research that is directed at decision makers, policymakers, the media, academia, and so on, trying to add an Canadian Arab voice to public discourse. And with regards to sort of society at large, we do a lot of education activities that range from conferences on economic issues, economic relations with the Arab world, to concerts, to lectures, to musical or dance performances, museum exhibits. It really varies a lot. We partner with a lot of organizations in doing that, from the Royal Interior Museum to the Ontario Science Center to the Royal Conservatory of Music and so on. And lastly, the focus on the community itself is really about community engagement and basically helping the community become better citizens, engaged citizens, and this is where the Your Voice campaign came from. We know that we don't have hard numbers, but we know everybody's perception is that the Canadian Arab community does not participate in the democratic process and in the vote in particular as much as other Canadians. Uh, Canadians in general are not doing all that well. I mean, we're looking at 60% participation. In the last election, uh, 9 million eligible voters did not vote. 9 million. The conservative government, majority government, was elected by 5.8 million. So more people stayed home than those who actually voted for the government. And then if you look at the Arab community, we're doing that even less than that. So we figured an education and motivation campaign, is a good thing. And we employed various kinds of tools in this campaign, from a professionally recorded Arabic rendition of O Canada a few days before Canada Day, to panels, to being present at picnics and public events, to we created something called the Arab Faces of Canada, which is the equivalent of Humans of New York, which you might have heard of. And there's a lot of social media work. We produced an animated video targeted at youth. As we all know, that youth demographic does not participate sufficiently in any of the different communities in Canada. So these are all the kinds of things. We've partnered with a lot of people, including NCAR, in making the campaign a success. Going back to O Canada in Arabic, it was a big hit. It received over 50,000 hits on YouTube. It was posted by the Department of Foreign Affairs. A number of Canadian embassies in the Middle East posted it on their websites. A number of news outlets reported on it. And the message there was really simple. The message to our community was, you're part of this country. There are elections coming up. You have a role to play. Feel patriotic and play that role. And to the larger society was, this is a gift from Canadian Arabs. Our Arabic version, non-official version of the national anthem, and it was very well received by most. Let me introduce Jihad. I mean, Jihad is a very good friend of mine. We've known each other for many years. He's recognized in Toronto as one of the leading civic leaders in the city. He's worked for a long time in different senior management positions in in immigrant settlement, community service organizations, and so on. He's currently the executive director of the Laidlaw Foundation, and that's a major funding organization in the city. He has served as executive director with Thorncliffe Neighborhood Office. Thorncliffe is one of the most, if not the most, diverse communities in the country. It's for various reasons. It's where many immigrants land, and there's a lot of apartment buildings in that area, and so it's a home to a very large and ongoing wave of immigrants. They come in, stay there a few years, and then many of them end up leaving, going to other areas. But it's actually been featured in a book by Doc Saunders of the Globe and Mail about receiving cities, cities that receive migrants from other places. So he's been at the Catholic Cross Cultural Services organization that delivers settlement services, race relations officer, and executive director with the Canadian Arab Federation. Currently a trustee of the Ontario Science Centre, and he formerly was a board member of the Fred Victor Services and OCASI. OCASI is the organization of I forget now what it is. It's something serving immigrants. And and he has received the Local Hero and William P. Hubbard Race Relations Awards. So welcome, Jihad, and go ahead.
Well, thank you. And let me just say a few words about this. I think this election is highlighting very clearly challenges and issues around multiculturalism and the whole question. But I think it's important to have a bit of the background on how this happened and came about. I think it's incredibly unique in the world, or was when it came that the notion of Canadian multiculturalism was groundbreaking, and it really started. The backdrop to it is really Quebec and the issues surrounding Quebec nationalism and the quite cultural revolution and the tension between the two solitudes, the English and French. So Canadian multiculturalism was really conceived of as a vision of an inclusive citizenship framework with a bilingual Canada. So it recognized the cultural diversity, it ensured cultural harmonies, it recognized culture but did not recognize languages, because French and English were the foundation and foundation and reference within which multicultural Canada is imagined. Quite simply, the two main principles of multiculturalism is that all citizens are equal, have freedoms, have the freedom to preserve, enhance, and share their cultural heritage. Secondly, the multiculturalism promotes the full and equitable participation of individuals and communities of all origins in all aspects of Canadian society. And it's interesting that it's really mentioned both individuals and communities, and that's part of the challenge and the tension between that collective rights and individual rights, and we see that playing out in issues around accommodations and otherwise. Multiculturalism, it's important to note also, does not defy Canada. It really defines it, and contrary to some of the early criticism, it actually enhances the identity and defines it, and it's now becoming part of the national identity. So we are, in a way, there is a general recognition and consensus that Canada is a multicultural society. There's not much debate about that anymore in many ways. At the core of it, multiculturalism affirms, supports, recognizes really three main pillars that affirms that again, cultural diversity. It's pretty evident and clear. You see it. And within that, all these groups, linguistic, diverse, cultural, ethnic minorities are equal. So the principle of equality, which is quite important. And it sets in motion the third pillar, which is introducing policy and legislations and laws, and it's protected as part of a deliberate government policy. So that's very important. And again, then it was quite groundbreaking and unique in the world. It's very difficult to separate multiculturalism from immigration. They really are sometimes indistinguishable, although they're not really the same. But there is a relationship between the patterns of immigration and who's coming to Canada over the years, and the changes in those who are settling and making Canada their home, and the development, evolution, and the eventual adoption of multiculturalism. So there is a great relationship there. Early on, as a result of the arrival of British explorers, as a result of the gold rush and the settlement of the West, Canada became a major immigrant-receiving country. Like other immigrant-receiving countries, mainly the United States, the focus has been on assimilating. Very little else or less was expected. A few have challenged that notion. So the main function of immigration was to integrate and assimilate people who are coming into the new society. Mainly revolves around economic and working and filling jobs, but being part of a new identity as well. So, but this has really changed, and that notion that was generally agreed upon and accepted of immigrants coming here and melting started to show some signs of challenge, and that was started early on, 1938, with a groundbreaking book, which I invite anybody who's really interested in the origin of multiculturalism in Canada as a policy to read that. That book's called "The Making of a Northern Nation," and the author is Murray Gibbon, and it's 1938 where he started saying that there is a value of diversity and started recognizing that immigration, and especially a very large wave of still mostly European, but non-Anglo, non-Scottish, not Irish. So there's the Greeks, the Italians, the Ukrainians, the East Europeans, the Jews were coming in between the walls. So that started to show changes and changing patterns of immigration. And discriminatory immigration and selection practices started to ease, and more non-white immigrants started coming, or non-typical Europeans started coming in large numbers. That's well into the 70s. For the first time, the majority of immigrants were from non-European sources. So really in less than 50 years, the immigration patterns and the source countries, and that's very relevant, has completely changed. And again, in 1971 is the first time the majority of immigrants were from non-European sources, and that's been the case ever since. And there's been very not so quite criticism of current immigration policies, where the focus especially the focus on immigration, trying to bring immigrants who speak English or ready to integrate, which is trying to go back to the pre-1970s levels of immigration and source countries. So it's not an exaggeration to say that the development of multiculturalism as a policy instrument in Canada is, I would argue, accelerated, facilitated, and perhaps made necessary by that changes patterns of immigration. Important and relevant timelines. So the 1963 Royal Commission on Bilingualism and Biculturalism, the Royal Commission is named Bilingualism and Biculturalism, and really wanted to explore the issues and tensions between English and French, and Francophone and Anglophone, and really that's the start of it. And the commission was appointed to examine the existing state of bilingualism in Canada and to work toward developing an equal partnership between British and French elements within Canada. So it paid little else, at least the starting of the commission, paid very little else to diversity, until group within, mainly I think it was Jewish immigrants and other European non-French, non-English, who started to say that this commission should pay attention to issues to our issues, the other groups. The commission produced 5 large volumes, fairly sizable ones, but the 5th one really speaks, because the commission was instructed later on to address the issue of cultural diversity. And in 1971, as a result of those 5 volumes of reports, the policy, up until then, this was an aspirational and largely symbolic recognition of Canada's ethnic diversity rather than a substantive change in government policies. Even the support and the adoption in 1971 of the recommendations of the Commission in a very eloquent speech by then Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau in Parliament, accepting the finding of the report and committing Canada and the government of Canada to support some key elements of it. But it really wasn't until and then the Ministry of Multiculturalism was established a couple of years later, in 1973. But it wasn't really until 1982 when multiculturalism was entrenched in the Charter of Rights and freedom. And that's, again, fundamental and important. The Charter itself must be interpreted in a manner consistent with the preservation and enhancement of the multicultural heritage of Canadians. And I realize I'm going on, but Raja and others feel free to interject at any moment. But I just want to give that backdrop in terms of where this policy came from. So this is the moment when multiculturalism became a fact, protected by an important document, which is the Charter of Rights and Freedom, and quickly became part of the national consensus. And I think there's very little debate about the value and importance and the reality of multiculturalism. I think there is generally it's part of the national consensus. In 1988, it's really the Canadian Multiculturalism Act, which is promote the full and equal participation again of individual and communities of all origin in the continuing evolution and shaping of all aspects of Canadian society. I think this is beautifully done, where it says Canada is an experiment, is unfolding. It's kind of the country of the future, and individuals and communities of various ethnic backgrounds have a role in shaping that I guess beautiful nation, if you will. And this, in many ways, constitutes an unequivocal call to participate and an explicit invitation to act. I think that's, in my view, a very clear invite to the increasingly diverse communities of Canada to be part of building the country, to be part of the system, the economic, cultural, and political and civic life. So multiculturalism, in its essence, and in its most ideal, I would say, and purest sense, is really a framework of inclusion of participation, integrating the various communities into the fabrics, the social, economic, artistic, and civic life of Canada. There are also obviously issues, and there are challenges. There are communities who have done very well. There are communities who have taken full advantage of multiculturalism and have answered the call to participate and act, and others haven't. And one of those communities that really haven't is our community, the Arab communities. In many ways, it's a pretty interesting case study because it's one of the oldest communities. As you know, the first Arab came here more than 120 years ago. Has been a rich contribution of Arabs to the Canadian society, but as a group, as a collective, has not really taken advantage of the policy and I guess the benefits of multiculturalism. And there's a number of reasons as to why this happened. Multiculturalism as a policy, it's important to note, and this is kind of a wrapping up, as a policy instrument does not guarantee inclusion. It's not an automatic inclusion tool. It requires a lot more than that. There has to be a willingness and desire to be part of a collective. There were many communities who are able and were willing to participate, and there are many successful examples of that across country, where communities who have taken full participation, full advantage of what multiculturalism has to offer by exhibiting their own culture. I mean, I think we should also recognize that a lot of what most people know and understand and think of multiculturalism is really festivals and dances and foods and ethnic, and that's okay and that's wonderful and beautiful and it's good to share, but it's our responsibility to take it beyond that, because that's where we are. I think there are some failures, but that failure does not mean the policy is faulty. I think there's also some legitimate critique of multiculturalism. There is that total negligence of Aboriginal communities as an important partner and component of Canada. So that the Act doesn't refer to that at all, the policy, and that's an issue. But I want to close by an observation, which is I think for all intent and purposes, we live in a post-multicultural society, and what that means is that now multiculturalism really is a fact, is a society, is as a fabric of our society. There is a general recognition. There's very few opposition to this, even in the midst of a heated elections where some elements of diversity, which namely the niqab, is making very serious impact on the election. And that notwithstanding, I think there's very little. I would see very few opposition to that particular. In fact, there's no reference to an opposition, or there's no party campaigning to challenge that. So that the multiculturalism is here to stay, and it's a fact of our country. And I'll stop right there. I'm happy to have a conversation, and I'm sorry if I'm yapping.
Thank you, Jihad. You mentioned there's criticism of multiculturalism, and I guess Neil Bisundath, known author and writer, intellectual, is one of the sort of higher profile individuals who are critical of multiculturalism. What's his criticism, and what's the response to it?
I think while I understand that while I do recognize that it's legitimate critique of multiculturalism, I do not. I think one of the critiques that I think makes no sense, and I completely disagree with, is that of Neil Pasunda. I think it's completely mistaken, and the premise of it is that it's creating fragmenting communities, and it's further ghettoizing communities, and it's tokenistic, and again, it encourages communities to be insular and to look inward, and does not, and that's his central piece, which that it does not encourage and does not lead into a Canadian identity, if you will, and that's where I completely disagree with him. I think he's has been critic of multiculturalism. I don't really hear much about him anymore, but there are more serious critique of multiculturalism as a policy instrument that has not really equalized the playing field and has not provided an opportunity for communities who are marginalized to begin with to take advantage of programs and take advantage of the policy and progress. And there are numerous examples of that. But at the same time, you name 3-4 communities who have benefited very well from really taking advantage of that, like the Punjabi community, who's probably the most successful community. And the Punjabi community is an example because they are so very distinct because of their dress and the turbans and the beard and things, but they've managed to really embrace multiculturalism as a practice, share their religion, their customs with the rest of Canada, and normalized it more so than any other community. And electorally, there's perhaps, and someone maybe can check this, I would contend that they are the single most successful community. They have cabinet ministers, several in fact, in various levels of government, and they have dozens of elected MPs and MPPs and municipal representatives in various parts of the country, not only in big cities and small cities. So that's just an example of one community. Compare it with our community, our own community, our community, where there is really no ghettoization. There isn't an ethnic ghetto, which is what Neil Pisonda contends. It isn't a geographic area where you can say their community is congregated and therefore they're enclosed and they're not connected. In fact, they should be. It should be the other way around, because they are spread everywhere and they're not ghettoized at all. So that's just an example for comparison sake.
Jihad, you mentioned the Sikh community, and that's an apt example to cite because on the one hand, you talked about how successful they have been in integrating and participating in the political system and the democratic process, and having members of the community elected to various offices. But at the same time, this same community has faced a number of challenges, and over the years, one of them many of us would remember is the RCMP police officer who wanted to keep the turban on as part of his costume, and he had to go to court to challenge his right to do that. Other example from that same community is the kirpan. And the kirpan is the little ceremonial dagger that observant Sikhs wear, and there had been situations where, for instance, at the court, where they would be prevented from going in with the kirpan because it's seen as a weapon. And now the latest example of the Sikh community challenging sort of the norms and going after its rights as religious rights as protected by human rights codes, as the man in Toronto who wanted to ride his motorcycle without a helmet because he can't have a helmet on top of the turban. And that's still in the courts. So, same community, all kinds of challenges. They took them on, and so far have won. And are at the same time well integrated in so many ways. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and I mentioned that community, the Punjabi and the Sikh community, as an excellent example of a community that has used the tools, which the charter. We all remember, if you've been here in the 90s, the fight with the Mounties and the turban, where it's now a fact, and there is you don't really hear of these kind of issues anymore, but they took it on. And the kirpan, I think you can even fly with it now and go through airports and all of that. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with the motorcycle because of the public interest and the bylaws. And I think eventually they will have the same ruling as to the RCMP and the kirpan and all of that. So I think they're an example of a community that has really experienced significant barriers, significant discrimination, and in fact they have been in the public eye for a very long time for the wrong reasons, for all kinds of reasons. But they've managed to insert, and I think this is where they've done well. They've managed to insert themselves in conversations that are critical and important to the community. They've made their religious events and festivals and celebrations into a community event, and they've opened the gurdwaras to homeless and to hungry people around Christmas and Thanksgiving and others, and fed everyone. So they've incorporated some elements of their culture and their religion, where there has to be food at the gurdwara at all times. So they've invited people to come in and see what their traditions is all about. So they've kind of, in many ways, demystified it by saying that we're part of the community, we're part of the neighborhood, we're part of the city, and we're part of city building. So they've inserted themselves, and that explains their electoral success. They explain their civic engagement and success at many levels in various jurisdictions. So again, they're an example of a community that would be really good to understand and reflect on. And again, they've been here for a very long time, almost as long as the Arabs. And since the day they landed, they've experienced difficulties with the ship, the Guara Maru, and the first really ship that was held off the Vancouver harbor for months and months, and they've sent back a lot of people. That was like 100 and so years ago. So they've I think they have triumphed. They've succeeded, but they've managed to hold on to the very symbol that at one point seems to be objectionable to a majority of Canadian, which now it's completely acceptable, incorporated into part of some of the most quintessentially Canadian institutions. The RCMP is just one of that.
Well, I'm a human rights commissioner with the province of Ontario, and I know that the human rights codes, whether at the provincial level or at the federal level, I mean, they all emanate from the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and they all have quasi constitutional powers. Which means that any other law in the land has to observe to the Human Rights Act, the Human Rights codes, and I mean the Human Rights. Ontario was the first province to actually have a Human Rights Commission and a Human Rights Code, and continues to be a leader in the country, and it all came from a place of inclusion, of making society, its institutions, its opportunities accessible to everyone. And human rights codes look at areas such as services, goods and services, employment, the use of facilities, and they basically lay the groundwork for all these different aspects of life to be accessible to everyone, whether that person has a disability, a physical or mental disability, or whether it's an issue of sex or sexual orientation or religion or race or so on and so forth. There are grounds that are protected by the human rights codes, and they've made they've made a huge difference in making Canada a more inclusive society, and a society that's accessible by more and more people. Of course, there's always more work to do. There's always issues of access to opportunities. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we have, multiculturalism as an act. It's the law. We have human rights codes that are also laws that protect people. And by many measures, if you look at Canadian society, it's probably more inclusive than any other in the world. If not the most, then one of the best.